So what's up, guys? It's Mauisnake, and the first thing I want to say is I hope you guys are enjoying your player break. The New York summer is fantastic. I'm having a great time, and I hope that you're able to get out wherever you are as well. I hope you're able to go out and socialize. I hope you're able to go out and talk to women respectfully. So get out there, have some fun, and stop pressing F5 on Twitter, Reddit, HLTV, all of that. And just watch this video. Okay, that's why we're here. We're going to talk about Evil Geniuses. That's what's at play right now. Evil Geniuses are shifting from this roster, which really was more or less a disaster. Like, there's nothing to be happy about with this team. Automatic, Breeze, Refresh, Nealon, Wiz. There was nothing of note accomplished by this team. The one BO3 win they had was when they actually were using Hex of note. I mean, the one BO3 win of note was when they were playing with Hex. And so once they brought Refresh on, they really didn't do anything. This team just sucks ass. That's pretty much the lightest way I could have put it. And it's also one of the most PG ways I could have put it. This team is terrible. And so they're actually switching this roster up. They're going to get rid of Breeze, Refresh, Nealon, and Wiz. And what they're going to be doing is they're going to be bringing in Walco, George Jr., and Hext. And they're changing out the coach from Vorborg to Malik. And so Malik has gotten over his trauma with Stewie, who wouldn't get Starbucks with him. And now we're going to actually see him back in the coach slot for this team. And I think that's overall a good change. I'm not going to get too deep into the coaching differences between Vorborg and Malik and bore you with those details, because I want to just talk about the players. Those are the guys you're going to see in the server. So you might not be familiar with a couple of these guys. Walco was the in-game leader for EG Black. He was the in-game leader for RGB when EG Black acquired that team, and that was the team with basically people like Hex, people like Wiz, and they are also throwing in a couple people that you may have a little bit more familiarity with. Hex obviously was on the lineup before. He was on the EG roster, the proper one, when they took down Heroic earlier in the spring groups for Blast. And the name that you also probably know is Junior, who played for Complexity. He played for Furia. He was known for being a high-fragging opper when he was on Triumph as well. And I think that a lot of people are willing to give Junior a second chance now. Given the dearth of talent in North America and the lack of competent oppers, even though we saw Junior's shortcomings when he played for a couple of lineups like Complexity and Furia, it's safe to say that he's regained his confidence with EG Black. I've actually talked to him recently. It seems like they're just very willing to accommodate him and what he wants to do, and there's a lot more in terms of conversation, whereas on, say, a team like Furia, he kind of just had to play in the system, and it's very difficult to play in a system like Furia's, as Safe is very good at demonstrating too. Even though I think Safe is solid, it's just obviously very hard to play as an opper when you're on that team. George has been my favorite Tier 2 rifler in North America for a while now, alongside Classia. I'm not going to talk about Classia too much. Hopefully he gets some more opportunities and shapes up in terms of maturity in the near future, but George was my other favorite. I've talked to Semphis about George before, and Semphis said that George is basically the North American ROPS. I think he actually said that in an article, but he also has just loved this guy. I like George's game a lot. It feels very methodical, very calculated. He's a late round player. He's a closer. He can be the finisher for this team, and then you can have a couple of these other guys sort of fill in the spots. I will say, this team lacks firepower. This team off the rip does not have the firepower to compete against Tier 1 European competition. So the reason I actually like this team, though, is that none of us are coming into this team and thinking or seeing it and saying, gosh, like they should be taking down world beaters and they should actually be competing for spots in playoffs. No, they're probably not going to do that. But I'm glad that Evil Geniuses has shifted to a North American focus. That being said, there's a little bit of a bitter taste in all of our mouths right now, because it was basically because several deals fell through with Evil Geniuses. They were trying to sign Electronic, they were trying to sign Jax, they were trying to sign Zorte, and they were trying to sign Elige. I think that this team gets a lot more interesting if instead of, say, Hext, you had an Elige on the roster. Regardless, we're going to see how this team is able to fare against European competition, but they're not going to have European players. And that's why it's important to, one, recognize that what Evil Genius is doing looks bad right now, because they are actually kind of getting their second choice in this whole ordeal, where they were trying to get this other lineup. But let's be honest, Did we really think that like automatic Jax Zorte Elige Electronic was also going to be incredibly competitive? It would have looked like EG were going to write a few blank checks to it, a couple different people, but Jax, come on, like he looked okay. He looked good actually at ESL Pro League when he stood in for Vitality in group stage games. But we saw with Jax's how much better G2 looked once they had JKS over Jax, and also Jax was just simply the weakest player on that G2 roster. Zorte actually is quite good. I actually think that's probably the most interesting signing of all of this, along with the fact that it's crazy to even think Electronic can speak English well enough to call for an Evil Geniuses team. But when all these deals fall through, that's when we're kind of in a position as fans or as pundits where we see this team and we're like, you didn't even really want North America. You didn't even really want it. And so if I have to just detach myself from the reality of what was happening behind the scenes and I just look at that new roster on paper, it's exciting, but it does at the same time feel like this was not their immediate intention, and now it's kind of a fallback plan, but it's still a little bit of a saving grace for them. And in terms of public perception, I'm going to be a bit more positive about this roster because I now have very clear expectations. I think they're going to lose a lot. I think they're going to lose constantly, but I think it's important that we give North American players a chance right now because the scene needs some way of being propped up. And with CS2 around the corner, it would be nice if there's a couple teams that can keep coming back to North America regularly and can actually disperse some of what they've learned in terms of information when they go from Europe and back. And so with some of the teams that are rising in the tier 1.5, tier 2 North America, this roster, after getting a lot of reps in with Europe, is going to be an incredibly valuable practice partner for those teams like Nouns and the ones that are just kind of like right there on the cusp of being decent enough to qualify for lands, and Party Astronauts, because they're coming back too after they were dropped by Evil Geniuses, which is an entirely separate issue. But I think that with this roster, overall, I wouldn't rate it highly. Like, I almost feel like you can't rate this 1 to 10 because competitively, it's garbage right now. But in terms of where this team can go and what it can do for the scene, I'm very high on it. So that's my opinion. It was more complex than a tweet. I will be tweeting about all the roster moves as they come about, so be sure to follow me on Twitter. But as always, being toxic is a choice.